The New York Times a couple of years ago came out with this opinion piece about pop culture. It's a pop culture piece. But there's one paragraph in there that really stood out, about what the 90s were like outside of that cultural context. Because, yeah, the 90s gave us Pogs and Pokemon, right? And, all sorts of other things. But it also was sandwiched between a lot of drama on both sides. You have Vietnam and the AIDS epidemics and all sorts of other bad stuff before. And then, the Iraq War, the war on terrorism, opioid crisis, et cetera, the global market collapse, or financial markets collapse after the 90s. But in those 9, 10-ish years, that decade, beautiful time, very relatively peaceful time. The absence of that ideological struggle between East and West. The absence of that looming threat of nuclear war. You don't have to worry about it anymore. Right? There's room for a lot of cultural and intellectual expression to really happen without that kind of McCarthyism or that concern about having to pick a side. And so these are some of the elements that made the 90s so great. And really, for a lot of the things that you guys had brought up, they're kind of follow-on effects of this newfound room to breathe, let's say. Right? The fact that the military was, had fewer restrictions, or was such a good time. The military was looking to demilitarize, or at least draw down numbers, because what the hell do we need all these troops for now? We're not fighting anybody, right? And so on. So, hell yeah, the 90s. It's also, I was growing up then, so good times. Looking back, though, what does the Cold War, what does the Cold War mean for us now? And there's a couple different ways to really think about it. You have your positive and very triumphant kind of interpretation, where you're looking at this as the victory of the Western liberal order. That's exactly what Fukuyama was, right? We have vanquished, or at least our political system has vanquished communism. Everything's good. This is the quote-unquote end of history, right? Triumphant interpretation of the Cold War. Right? All the things that we have done up to that point to bring about the end of the Soviet Union, that's all justified. The ends justified our means, even though a lot of it was unsavory. Right? We still won, so what? We're good. We're in the good spot here. On the other hand, there are critical interpretations of the Cold War. Right? A lot of those battles and a lot of those investments that we had were very expensive in nature. Making all those bombs, making all those tanks and ships, training all those people, deploying them worldwide and leaving them there. Germany, for example, Korea, Japan, all these bases cost a lot of money. Billions of dollars that could go somewhere else, maybe. Right? Maybe a school, maybe a hospital, maybe X, Y, and Z. Whatever program you want to support, it maybe could have gone to that instead. That's a critical way of looking at the Cold War. Even though the end of the Cold War gave room for Western liberal democracy to breathe and thrive, could it have been brought about in any other way? Maybe, maybe not. But at least that's one way to think about it. But again, taking all that into account, the Cold War, especially after the archives had been opened in the Soviet Union, or across the Soviet Union, is very much like our own kind of growth into adulthood. And as we become older, we grow up and we hit a certain point where we have a very clear narrative of what our childhood might have been like. My dad was awesome. My mom was awful. My uncle, always played baseball with me. He was great. He was always there. My aunt made awful spaghetti or something. I don't know. We all have established narratives. But then as we get older and we learn more about who they were as actual people, as we gain context into their life, as we unearth maybe like old VCRs or letters or whatever it is from their past, we understand them a whole lot better. We understand why maybe our parents weren't there when we needed them. That's what the archives have done for a lot of historians and a lot of political scientists as far as understanding what the Cold War was really like. So yeah, early on, of course, especially Fukuyama, that dude wrote that book and that article immediately after the end of the Cold War. He's not working on perfect information, but he had good information up to that point. Later interpretations based on what's revealed in the Soviet archives give us more complex and more nuanced stories about this relationship with the Soviet Union. And so you end up with people saying, or historians and political scientists concluding that, the Cold War didn't have to be a war at all. A lot of it was just the superpowers getting dragged into unnecessary fights because of third world actors. The Koreans, that was definitely a national struggle. They could have just kept it there and on the peninsula for themselves. But of course, the superpowers had to react. They were forced to react. Vietnam could have just been a national independence struggle, and that's it. But the superpowers had to react. Right? And you apply that same kind of logic, especially as you read more and more Russian sources, and you start to see that it's never really as cut and dry as what Fukuyama might have talked about. And even he himself has gone back to, to revise a little bit of his own position. Right? Even if you take the Soviet Union out of the picture, the world is still not perfect. Right? There is still a lot of problems happening across the world. Nuclear proliferation, for instance. Like, what the hell are we going to do with that massive stockpile of Soviet bombs, of Soviet nuclear weapons that might not have good controls anymore because the government that was supposed to take care of them kind of isn't there anymore? Who knows what kind of bad actors might distribute or sell or give that technology to other countries. The first row here, those are the other nuclear powers. By powers, I mean they just happen to have nuclear bombs. They definitely don't have nearly as much as the US or the Soviets. But, without the context of the Cold War, do they continue with their own nuclear weapons production, maintenance, reductions? What do they do? What about North Korea, Iran, Iraq, Libya? Countries who are actively, at least in the 90s, actively doing nuclear weapons research. Do we allow them to keep doing that? When it comes to nationalism, right? A lot of nationalism during the Cold War is informed by what ideology your country is going to buy into. Because you had to choose between the West or the East. Your nation is decided by whether or not you're part of either sphere. And that's what happens here with Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia. Czechoslovakia, right, or at least a lot of these countries are bound by political ideology as opposed to ethnicity. Now that you get to remove that factor, that calculus, right? I don't have to be in the same country as you because you just believe the same thing I do. I want to be in a country with him because he and I share the same culture. He and I share the same traditions, etc. Right? It happens peacefully in Czechoslovakia, very nicely. They vote on splitting up. A clean breakup, very mutual, very nice. Right? They still meet each other for Thanksgiving. Yugoslavia, not so much. Not so much. This is about as ugly a breakup as it can get. Right? This was once a huge country, bound together by a communist dictator. But alas, you remove that from the picture, that stabilizing force, and everybody wants to be on their own. It becomes a very violent, turbulent place in the 90s. And, dang it, I keep forgetting to remove that link. That's been there since this morning. Anyway, sorry, I derailed myself. Yeah, very violent struggle in Yugoslavia. Really, really a black mark in the 90s. But nonetheless, ethnic nationalism is the thing again. If you're a huge fan of ethnic nationalism, this was the time for you, so that's good. But alas, in 1999, late 99, NATO comes in and starts bombing the region so that, a lot of this ethnic killing and ethnic cleansing kind of gets stopped. It was a good thing. It was a good thing. Right. What's that?
Not a very modern idea.
Not a very modern idea, yeah, but it is what it is. Alas, some people thinks it's effective, and so it keeps happening. Anyway, that NATO action kind of calls into question, like, what the hell is NATO gonna be for? Like, it was a group or it was an organization established as a deterrent to Soviet aggression. If you attack one of us, you're attacking all of us, right? It's not something that the Soviets will want to do because, even if they attack the smallest country in order to, for a land grab or some other strategic reason, they're gonna incur the wrath of the United States and the UK, Western Europe, everybody. But now that that major existential threat is gone, what the hell are we going to do? You know, are we a peacekeeping force? Are we going to enforce something? And if we are going to enforce something, what exactly are we going to enforce? Our own mission, the UN's mission, the US mission, right? Lots of questions about NATO, and you know, nothing absolutely perfectly conclusive comes in the early 90s. You know, a lot of these outstanding issues don't have to be divisive necessarily. A lot of them are actually constructive. Right? In 1993, early 93, you've got the culmination, or the formation, sorry, of the European Union. It's an economic union for the most part, but it does serve some very political purposes. A lot of these countries will probably never go to war with one another. So that's good. You know, but it does play on that theme between, you know, that's been happening between the world wars and immediately after World War II, where countries who trade with one another, or at least who kind of share a common currency, won't be fighting one another. It's a means, it's a method for guaranteeing, or at least propagating peace, on top of what the UN already does for us. But at least this is in the European context. The problem, however, is, of course, this is a continent that has had centuries worth of independence from one another. These states are now suddenly all bound together by this supranational or supranational, right, organization. Like someone from the Balkans has to answer to someone in Brussels, or you know, someone in Spain has to answer to the needs of another tiny country in the Mediterranean. Like, what the hell? Why am I bound to them when I'm doing so much better off? Right? This is a continent that's not used to that kind of political organization. It's something we wrestle with all the time in the US, and that's what we've signed on for as far as states go. But the EU, this is brand new to them. This is brand new to them. Right? Nonetheless, fairly constructive in nature. Regarding the East and West, look at Berlin and Germany as a whole. You're latching on this decrepit, you know, lagging, very outdated form or economy in both East Berlin and East Germany to the very modern, sleek, you know, efficient West Berlin, West Germany. You know, it's a hard transition to make because these are two largely incompatible systems. You know, and the West Germans, West Berliners, are saddled with having to take care and having to make this new system work. Unification is nice and all, but then when it comes down to the nitty-gritty of it, the nuts and bolts, it gets very messy. And even today, you know, a lot of this economic standards, economic factors, or the data, shows that, you know, people who had lived and grown up and been trained in East Germany continue to struggle and lag behind a lot of their West German, West Berlin counterparts. Right? It's still something that they're figuring out, but at least it's getting better. You could say a lot of the same thing about China. Well, maybe not a lot of the same thing, but you could say the same thing about China. How do you integrate the world's largest population with a global market? Especially if it's still communist.
You make it half communist, half capitalist.
Bill Clinton had kind of the same idea, right? His administration believed that, you know, if we were to introduce some liberalizing forces to China, if we were to get them tapped into the global market, you know, we bring in a little bit of that freedom into that country, maybe that small seed will spark a chain reaction, just like it did in the Soviet Union.
It has. It's just taking a while.
It's taking a lot longer, yeah, for sure. And that was the logic there. But maybe the collapse didn't happen. But this was the opportunity for China to become this explosive behemoth that we now know today. Right? It was already on the rise, but it was a slow rise. But as soon as it became part of that global community, and it had access, and it had deals with the rest of the world, like, its potential is really, really, really maximized there. Right? In the absence of an ideological struggle, a lot of foreign policy and a lot of diplomacy becomes really concentrated around the idea of human rights or humanitarian issues. Right? And we'll talk about that in the next slides. But what about the United States? Specifically the US. But also, you guys remember, or have you seen the Tank Man photo? The one guy in front of maybe 1 or 3 tanks? He's actually standing in front of a lot more than just that. This photo is even bigger. I had to cut it a little bit to make it fit. But it's a whole column. It goes far back. Far back. Some might say this guy is like a Giga Chad for stopping that. But alas. Yeah, he's just doing his groceries. Pretty cool dude. He's also dead. Huh? What's that?
You think he's still alive?
I think he's dead.
I think he's dead.
I mean, I'm pretty sure he's dead, man. I mean, China's not going to let that one slide.
Well, according to China, that didn't even happen.
Yeah, you're right. They're not. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. Yes.
Which is crazy.
This half of the PowerPoint is actually just empty. None of this is there.
Deny it.
Hey,
Just deny it.
what are you talking about? Tiananmen, it's a very nice place. Lovely place. God, man. Anyway, moving on. Coming back to this, not this, but this. Like, what is the U.S. going to do? We find ourselves in a very similar-ish situation as the end of World War II. We've defeated a major enemy, and we have a choice. We can revert back into being an isolationist country like we did at the end of World War I, and just focus on us. We could demilitarize, we could shrink everything down, we can reinvest everything back into the people, or we can invest a lot of that into rebuilding Europe, or rebuilding the world into our image. Or we could double down on becoming international and becoming a real world leader. And the Clinton administration kind of does a little bit of both. Right? They do seek to demilitarize, but they also want to keep engaged with the rest of the world. Right? We also act as kind of a global police force, just a little bit. You know, we definitely invade and not invade. I guess we liberate Kuwait for sure.
Yo.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Now you do. And they say you don't learn anything in college. It's good stuff. Right? Oslo Accords lay down a possible path for peace in the Middle East. And then, of course, Kosovo. I don't know how to pronounce it very well. Right? Many different ways that the American military, despite lacking an enemy, still finds itself employed and finds itself being very useful. You know, a lot of humanitarian missions also rely heavily on American military force. Or not force, but like American military assets. We're able to reach places in the globe that most other countries just can't. You know, we have a Navy that's truly globally operational. We have an Air Force that can reach literally any plot of land anywhere else, even Antarctica. Right? And so, of course, the humanitarian missions are assigned to the military. There's a section here about the Americans willing to invest a lot more in foreign aid to countries because there's a lot less resistance now. During the Cold War, foreign aid kind of had an ideological connotation to it. There were strings attached. Right? I'm giving you money because you're anti-communist. I'm giving you money because, you are going to help me fight against that bad guy over there. But now the focus is, hey, I'm going to give you money so you can develop, and then you can be part of this global open market, global free market system. And we can trade. You're somewhere I can send goods to. I can buy your goods, etc., right? It's kind of supposed to be a positive feedback loop, a win-win for everyone. Yes, thank you. Let's focus on Europe here, on this map. In 1988, you see that Europe really doesn't have an awful lot of investment going on there. There's kind of no need, right? Western Europe is well developed, and then we also just can't access Eastern Europe because, hey, Iron Curtain's still up. Fast forward a decade later, and then boom, just like the Marshall Plan, we're sending a ton of money into Eastern Europe because we're also helping these countries who had fallen so far behind rebuild and catch up with the rest of the West. Right? Not the worst thing, for sure. We want more business partners. We want trade. A lot of these countries end up signing on for NATO and signing on to be part of the EU. And being part of the EU is not easy to do. So it's a good thing all around. It's a win-win all around, right? A lot of these Eastern European countries getting a lot of help and assistance from the US. Good times. And so, by this point, like, the U.S. is still struggling with this identity crisis. What the hell do we actually do? And really, like, the West, what the hell does the West do? For the longest time, we've had documents to really tell us this is what we must do in the face of adversity. In the face of communism, we contain it, and we resist it wherever it rises. But we don't really have something that clear, or at least nothing that clear came out in the earliest years at the end of the Cold War. Right? We were an empire in search of an existential threat, and we kind of couldn't find one. Until Anthony Lake. This is going to be our primary source for today, so there is a Microsoft Word document. It's about a page and a half read, but the original scan is also in Google Classroom from the Clinton Foundation, and it's, I think, 19 or 29 pages. I can't remember what the first digit was, but it's a long read and fascinating one. But the most relevant, the juiciest bits are in that Word document. All right? So let's take a few minutes with that. If you do finish early, please look up who this Anthony Lake is, or Tony Lake, as he likes to go by, and start thinking about why that's important. Someone plugged in something. Would anyone like a little more time? Fantastic. Let's start with who is Tony Lake / Anthony Lake? Mr. Jordan.
President Clinton's national security advisor.
Oh, that's a big one, yeah. Cash money. Makes this guy kind of important, right? Pretty big deal, one might say. And that kind of also helps me be inclined, a little more inclined, to believe him. At least because he might be an authority. He might be an authority on what he's talking about. You know, we definitely trust, or at least we definitely believe in Kennan's long telegram because he was embedded in Moscow for years, many, many years before he released that. You know, and it had a lot of very astute, very good observations. And so apply a similar logic to Mr. What's his name, Lake here. And hey, you know what? Takes a lot to become part of the National Security Council, so yeah, this guy might actually kind of know what he's talking about. Now, why is that important? Why is what this guy is saying important? Think of the timing. Think of what's going on around the world at this time, the context. Right? I mean, it's really a lot of it is what we just talked about, applying all that prior established knowledge of 15 minutes ago. Why is that important? Why is this document, why is his presence important?
Because he's trying to combine countries that are threatening to economic and diplomatic peace. He's trying to combine them and trying to merge them so that way they can have those ties with each other.
Maybe, possibly. But I mean, is he calling any specific country out here? No, right? No. Not directly. Nothing specific.
The shoe fits kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. If this person, even if they're a threat to market democracy or if they're hostile to it, we still should engage with it. Mr. Rowe.
Probably not anywhere near the answer you're looking for, but you talked about the 4 things that they need to focus on.
Yeah.
And the 4th one was humanitarian rights. And this took place a year before Rwanda.
Hey.
There were a couple months before this started, and we all know that very Rwanda, they just completely ignored it.
A little hypocrisy there.
Refused. Didn't he say it was the single worst
What's up?
mistake he ever had was
Who?
not engaging in Rwanda?
Who, this guy?
Bill Clinton.
Oh, Quinn? I'm
I
not.
assume he's an advisor.
He is a direct advisor to Clinton. Yeah, I mean that was going to be ultimately the next question, like who's the audience here? But yes, yeah, this report goes to Clinton directly. Right? So this is important, yeah, because like think about the setting. Clinton had just come into office this year, right? 1993. George H.W. had just left office, and he had presided over the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Big Bad's gone. We also have a new president on top of all that, and what the hell is this president gonna do now? He's got the next 4 years, or 3 and change, to make his mark, or at least to lead the country, lead the West, lead the free world into this whole new environment. There's nothing concrete yet to define American foreign policy until this. And so this is going to be the cornerstone of American foreign policy over the next however long Clinton's in office, however long his successor is in office, however long that successor after that is in office. And as you read this, you kind of get that impression that we kind of did all of this anyway, right? We followed through on a lot of these principles that Lake laid out for us. And so that's why this document is particularly important. Right? But at the same time, here's one big question. Like, what can we learn about the society that produced this document? About the 90s U.S.? Oh, okay.
It's kind of in the title, changing from like containment of communism to like, kind of like they're not pressing trade on anybody, but I think that's kind of like a solution.
Yeah.
To kind of this larger problem.
So what is that problem?
I guess the whole like Red Scare is kind of over. Like,
yeah.
Communism is kind of over. So now it's just like if you trade with people, you can avoid war, and if people freely want to trade with you, then that will avoid conflict altogether.
Problem might be how to preserve or how to maintain peace or how to expand, enlarge the peace.
Yeah, I think to have up that, like, as far as, like, Mr. Lakey was, like, saying, basically, like, he wants to, like CNN cover stuff, and then the American public's like, oh, man, America needs to help, like, we need to go over there. But then, like, he's like, well, we actually need to, like, take a step back and, like, if we go over there, like, is it going to be a permanent fix, or are they going to go right back after we leave?
Yeah.
Like, I think now, like, they're trying to, like, decide, like, how America's going to intervene with stuff.
I actually really like how you guys are putting this because, I mean, compared to the other classes, like, this kind of unique framing of that solution is a really nice way to put it, right? The United States at this point is a solution looking for a problem. Right? We have all these resources. Even though they're finite, we have what? We have, he calls it out as, we have financial, diplomatic, and military national security resources. What are we going to put it towards? What are we going to put it towards to get the maximum effect, the maximum benefit? Because, yeah, we are the superpower. We are the lone superpower. But we don't have unlimited resources. No, we have to make this, we have to make the most efficient use of this. And so, in a sense, you know, again, solution looking for a problem, but at the same time looking for an enemy. The next paragraph after that, he says that we have overlooked a prior strategic question, the question of where, which sets context for such military judgments. Like, where are we going to commit all of these resources? Are we going to fight somebody? Are we looking for an enemy to conquer? Think of the context of the existence of the United States. Ever since its founding, we've had, you know, European enemies trying to quash this experiment in the Western Atlantic. Right? On top of that, then after we settled that problem, we had to expand westward. We had projects to finish in the West. After we've gone from sea to shining sea, we have markets to conquer. Then we had World War I, World War II, the Cold War. A very common American historical narrative is that narrative of struggle. There's always something to fight for and fight against. But now that the Cold War is over and we've lost that major ideological enemy, what the hell are we going to do? Who are we going to start fighting now? It wasn't really that much of a calculation at the time. We thought we could win them over, hence them admitting them into the World Trade Organization. right? That was the optimistic hope at the time, because the 90s is optimism. 90s is all about optimism. So that national struggle, or that search for a national struggle, kind of gets answered in 9/11 for us.
That's what I was about to go with it. I didn't want to like get dark or anything. I was like,
No.
let's start a problem with ourselves and then blame it on another country and then start a war.
And there you go.
Yeah.
And there you go. There you go. And that's going to be the next class, and that's kind of where the course is going to end. We're going to end with the multipolar world and with the issue of 9/11 and global terrorism. All right? Boop. Any questions about today's lecture? Not that much. I do have homework for you guys. Please, 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 please read Huntington's Clash of Civilizations. My God, if there is like one article that helps really, really put into context, really provide a strong framework for understanding the post-Cold War world, it's Huntington. Clash of Civilizations. The article, not the book. I don't expect you to read an entire book over the weekend. The article is 20-ish, 26 pages, but they're fat, fat letters, and there's maps. So it's not that long. That's what I'm saying. Please read it. I'm not saying that reading it just for this class is important, but reading it as a naval officer or a Marine Corps officer, this is that important of a text, right? So please, please, please read Huntington's Clash of Civilizations.